Welcome, Tobias, and welcome, Simon.
Good evening to you.
If I can start with you, Tobias, as I say, lots and lots of clarion calling last night. Oh, we've got a deal here. It's a peace deal. We thrashed it out. Unfortunately, Israel wasn't involved in this. Israel claims that Hamas was just playing games to make it look like the bad guy as it carried out its threat to attack Rafah. Would you concur with that view?
Yeah, I mean, it shows just how complicated the situation is, with so many factors involved, so many stakeholders as well. The concern from Israel, understandably, is does Hamas remain in control in the long term? Hamas's doctrine is very much to see the annihilation, the removal of Israel as a state. And even Andrew Mitchell, the deputy foreign minister, made it clear that it's unacceptable to have somebody in charge of Gaza in the long term. But more immediately, we've got to get aid into the country. There's an increased risk of famine as declared by the United Nations. But of course, the crossings are now closed. The international community is looking to open up an entrance point, access point, a maritime one off the coast. It was a question I asked today, what Britain's involvement would be in that. But ultimately, we do want people to get round the table to agree some form of plan, which will see the hostages released as well as that aid getting in as well. Many factors to be discussed. And as you imply, we're far from getting anywhere close there right at this moment.
Indeed. If I can bring Colonel Simon Diggins in. Simon, obviously the key factor in these peace talks is, and always will be, the hostages. We think we're optimistically there may be 130 still alive. It may be far fewer than that, but there are still hostages in those tunnels. They are the key bargaining chips of Hamas. And we heard that Israel was ready to at least agree to a temporary ceasefire in order to release about 30 of them, particularly vulnerable and old hostages. But that's gone down the pan now. I mean, what chance realistically will there be of any significant ceasefire or peace unless Hamas agree to release, well, preferably all of the hostages, or if they must, the majority of them? What chance is there of peace while those hostages are still kept in those tunnels?
I think there is. The hostages, as you say, an absolutely key issue. I mean, taking hostages is a wicked thing to do, and using them as leverage, as they are doing at the moment, bringing all the suffering and misery to the Gazan people is also there. I think the other issue, though, which is there, Kevin, is what the ceasefire is there for. Is it simply a temporary ceasefire in order to begin that conversation, as you say, hostages released, Palestinian detainees released, humanitarian aid in, or is it, if you like, on a glide path to something like a more permanent ceasefire? My understanding is that there's that second issue, which is also part of the issue. What Hamas has been trying to push for is some form of permanent ceasefire. So, yeah, recognise it's going to happen stage, but there's going to be a permanent ceasefire. Israel is reluctant to do that at the moment, as long as it's clear that Hamas are effectively still remaining in charge in Gaza. So there's two elements to that, and I think whilst there's lots of agreement about the fact there should be a ceasefire, and indeed the principle of exchanging hostages for detainees is also there, but those factors, particularly what the medium to long-term solution like, is also holding back the actual promulgation of a ceasefire.
If I could bring you back in, Tobias, what do you think it would take for Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire? I've heard that some ceasefires they've been talking about might even last for a year. So what we're potentially talking about is a long cessation of hostilities. What do you think it will take for Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to that kind of scenario?
Well, I think you need to place into context the difficulties of Israeli politics, of having to balance the left and the right. This is what Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to do. Very, very difficult situation at the best of times. And so what I think has been discussed just there is perhaps splitting this up into what can be done in the immediacy to get the hostages out, to get the aid back in, and then to get some form of transitional council or a technocratic government in place to run Gaza. But of course, Hamas isn't interested in that. Hamas wants to retain power. And then we dodge the bigger question, which for me is Iran's proxy influence. We've saw this entire Middle East challenge inflame because of Iran. That could easily happen again. Hezbollah is the most powerful non-state actor in the world. They've yet to play a role in what's going on here. For me, what we've left untouched for too long, for decades in fact, is Iran's ability to influence the region, from Tehran. Its influence through Hamas, which we've just been discussing, Hezbollah, and of course the Houthis. Until we break that relationship, until we cut that umbilical cord, I'm afraid whatever we discuss on the ground, temporary otherwise, it will not last because Iran will remain there.
I'll get Simon's view on this in just a moment, but do you think, implicit in what you just said, Tobias, is it your feeling that the West is not being tough enough on the Hamas-Iran axis, as it were? Because, clearly what Netanyahu did last night went four square against what Biden wanted and what Cameron wanted. Is the West being too weak on the whole situation in the Middle East? You choose your words. I'm saying we absolutely need to be, I think, more involved in seeking solutions. It's a test of actually where our world is going, across the entirety. What's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in the South China Sea as well. There are a lot of red lights that are flashing now on the global order dashboard. Over the last 30 years, we've become too risk averse into standing up into harm's way. And it's now, I'm afraid, those chickens are coming home to roost. Absolutely, we need a wider, longer-term strategy for Iran and indeed for Russia, and not as well as China, something we discussed in Parliament today. It's not, I'm afraid, coming to fore, and these three states are starting to increasingly work closer together, and it means that putting fires out, such as in the Middle East, is becoming ever harder. You both kindly agreed to stick around after the break where we'll discuss that hack, the Chinese hack on the MOD. But can I quickly ask you, Simon, what do you feel about the apparent fact that Netanyahu is not too bothered about what Biden or Cameron or Sunak think? I mean, what he did last night in terms of reopening hostilities, raining down bombs on Rafah, went directly against what Joe Biden and Cameron wanted. He doesn't seem to be too worried about his traditional Western allies.
No, I think you're right. I think it's two things. One is kind of positive and understandable. What happened on October 7th was absolutely shameful and disgraceful. And he has a legitimate constituency, which means that Israel needs to be defended and he must be seen to defend it. That's, if you like, the positive side of it. The more negative side of it is actually what Tobias already said, that his internal politics and internal politics of Israel is very, very complicated. Prior to this war happening last year, you'll recall there was rioting in the streets of Israel around his proposed changes to the relationship of the Knesset to their Supreme Court. So internally, there's a great deal of angst around. And his coalition is only surviving with the agreement of some of the most hard-line of the Zionists and, if you like, Jewish ethno-nationalists within Israel. And so he is caught in a dilemma, almost regardless of what he wants to do or he's been encouraged to do by external actors, the UK, the US and other people. He's also got this internal dynamic about how he keeps his coalition together and how he deals with a grouping who have should we say, a very different view from those of people like Biden and indeed the wider West as well. So he's caught on that at the moment. Why is he doing what he's doing? It's because of that driver, that dynamic is more important to him than, if you like, the wider view of the West. Yeah,
just before we go to break, I'll just read you what Israel National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said of this situation. He said, there is only one response to Hamas's ploys and games, and that is the immediate order to conquer Rafah, increase military pressure, and to continue to crush Hamas until it is completely defeated. So I don't think we're going to be seeing the end of these hostilities anytime soon. Thank you so much both for joining us, and we're going to rejoin you after these messages.